Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin and War in Ukraine playlist with Dr. Brovkin. Today I'd like to discuss the Kursk incursion, or the invasion of Ukrainian forces into Russian territory in the Kursk province, but specifically to compare Western coverage, Ukrainian coverage, and Russian coverage in the mass media of this, one could say, historic event, a very important event. What I noticed by watching both of these, and which I do all the time, there's significant difference in terms of what is being said, how it is presented, the images that are being presented, and the interpretation that is being presented. And I want to mention that everything that I will quote here is totally available for everybody in the West, including Russian TV, which is widely available. It's called OneTV.ru. One could watch it in Russian or turn on the Google Translate. So all the facts that I mentioned can be verified, and it's available for all. So what's interesting, I'll start with the Western coverage of the invasion of Ukrainian forces into Kursk. And now what you see, of course, is what I see, everybody sees on Western screens, is the successful breakthrough of the Ukrainian forces into Russian territory. You see images of Ukrainian tanks. You see repeatedly, over and over and over again, the same shots of the same photos of Russian prisoners of war that are being taken and that are being transported in trucks. You see Ukrainian flags. You see tanks of various types moving into Russian territory. One speaks about hundreds of thousands of square miles of territory seized. And that's what you see. I saw also Biden, who claims that he's totally in control of the situation, constantly in touch with Zelensky. We see Borrell, who is a foreign policy spokesman for European Union, supporting Ukrainian invasion into Russian territory. And the Western media says that the goals of this operation is to seize more territory so that it could be swapped with the Russians in a peace deal that will be coming. So this is pretty much it. That, as you will see, a lot of things are not covered and are not mentioned, and that's why I'm doing this video. Now, before I move on to the Russian side of things, I'd like to speak about the Ukrainian coverage. And there I would like to mention someone named Arestovich, who is Ukrainian. He speaks always for Ukrainian side. He has a daily program discussing events of the war, and he used to be a presidential candidate until Zelensky canceled elections, and he used to be an advisor to Zelensky, and he's a very astute observer, and obviously totally for Ukrainian side, and is dreaming of Russian defeat. So what he says is essentially a Ukrainian point of view. Now, Aristovich's main point is that this is a great success for the Ukrainian side. And he keeps on explaining that the penetrating Russian territory with small groups caught Russia totally unaware, humiliated Putin, and according to Arestovich, the main point of this operation is to convince the West that the war against Russia can be won, that one can invade the Russian territory, move into it, hit strategic targets, and be successful. And of course, that means that the purpose from the point of view of Arestovich is to make the West pay more, deliver more weapons, support Ukraine more vigorously, impose even harsher sanctions on Russia because war is winnable. And Arestovich believes it is, with all these things being implemented. And I'm sure many people in the West think so too. Otherwise, they wouldn't spend billions on doing this. And now I'd like to speak about the Russian coverage of the war and what especially they did cover that is not mentioned at all in any Western coverage. So I rely in my in my report on the words of Mr. Alaudinov, who is the commander of the military detachment called Akhmat, which consists of the Chechens, who are one of the best fighting units, and they were in that area. They were covering the northern border, the southern border from the Russian side, and they were in Belgorod province, and now they are together with other troops that were sent in there to the Kursk province. So Alaudinov said basically the same thing as what is being reported by others in the West as well, that Russia was caught on guard, that the first day of the invasion nobody knew where anybody was, that there was total chaos, that the Russian side was caught completely unprepared, and all these things are just basically confirmed the same. What did he say that was not said in the West, and that's most interesting, is that they intercepted conversations on the other side, which is on the Ukrainian side, were conducted in Polish language, in French language, and in English. Now, this is very important because that means that there were people of Polish nationality with Polish passports, military personnel with Polish passports fighting on the territory of the Russian Federation. Internationally recognized territory, not the disputed territory of Donbass, which used to be Ukraine. Before that, it used to be USSR, but on the territory that is internationally recognized as Russian territory, which means Kursk province. Now, that raises all kinds of interesting questions. Does that mean that the president of Poland is aware of this? Does this mean that President Macron is aware that the French personnel with French passports, I doubt that there would be some other people speaking French who are not French citizens, are conducting military operation inside Russia? Does that require the consent of the Assemblée Nationale in France? And of course, interesting who these people were who spoke English. Now, of course, if one could hear it, I would probably be able to determine if these were the British or the Americans. Also, Alaudinov mentioned that they saw physically black soldiers in the Ukrainian side. Also interesting to see whether they were the French black or the American black or the British flag or whatever. But of course, if it is true that President Biden, as he claims, is in constant touch with Zelensky, it would be very interesting to know if he's also aware that the English-speaking black persons are fighting in Kursk on the territory of Russia with the Ukrainian side. Now, this is one interesting fact that Alaudinov mentioned. The second thing that he mentions is that there is an evacuation of the population going on, not the Russian evacuation. No, this was confirmed today by ABC that the Ukrainians are evacuating Russian citizens, supposedly those who volunteer, into Ukraine. Now, as far as I know, I'm not an expert on international law, but as far as I know, this is called kidnapping, or this is called international terrorism, when civilians are taken over to the other side of the border. Civilians, by the rules of war, should be left alone and should not be mistreated or forced to evacuate. By the way, Putin was charged with a war crime when he evacuated children from the Kherson province, because by international law, Ukrainians consider Kherson to be Ukrainian territory. So on that basis, the evacuation of children was considered a war crime, and Putin is charged with that. One should add, though, that at that time, Kherson province, the Russians proclaimed already to be Russian territory, and they claimed that this was evacuation of children from the Russian territory. Now, today, Ukraine has not annexed Kursk province. So from the international law point of view, evacuation of Russian citizens from Russian territory into Ukraine is kidnapping, and it is a war crime. I wonder if the International Court of Justice would charge with war crimes Mr. Zelensky, who ordered this evacuation. Now, the next interesting point that Alaudinov mentioned is that there are German tanks. Everybody knows they're German tanks. But I think the historical significance is that exactly 81 years ago, in 1943, there was a famous Kursk battle, which basically turned the tide of the war. In a sense that the German army, Wehrmacht, never conducted any offensive operations after Kursk battle. There were about 10,000 tanks engaged in both sides, and after two days of battle, the Germans decided it's not worth it and abandoned the fight and began their retreat, which ended up 2 years later in Berlin. Now, one thing that I should say is that the presence of German tanks with Ukrainian crews or with German crews or whatever on the territory of Kursk area, Kursk province, in Russia proper, is probably a great gift to President Putin, because this inflames Russian public opinion. The German tanks again are on Russian territory. And indeed, there is a kind of increase in volunteers who are willing to join the Russian army, and there's a kind of almost universal patriotic rallying to the flag because the Ukrainians and the Germans together are now on Russian territory. And the photographs of the destroyed Ukrainian German tanks and the destroyed French motorized vehicles and all kinds of other military equipment supplied by the West is something that the Russian coverage does do, whereas the Westerners do not. They don't speak at all about any Western participation in this operation. Another thing that the Russian coverage shows, and not a word about that is in the West, is that the original plan of the Ukrainian side was to seize Kursk nuclear power station, which is about 60 kilometers to the north from where they are now, which is about 15 to 20 kilometers into Russian territory. Now, if they had succeeded to do that, then they could have engaged in a kind of a nuclear blackmail. They could have said to Putin, look, either you get out of Ukraine or else we'll blow up nuclear power station with catastrophic consequences for the central Russian provinces. The heartland of Russia, which is only about 300 kilometers to the north, is Moscow. So this was, according to the Russian side, this was the original plan. What confirms it somewhat is that the Ukrainians at the same time hit the Zaporozhye nuclear power station, which is right on the borderline, on the front line, a territory that the Russia claims to be its territory annexed from Ukraine in Donbass, and the Ukrainians still consider their own. They just hit one of the buildings in just a couple of days ago in Zaporozhye, and again, this would appear that a kind of act of desperation to create a nuclear explosion on the territory of Russia or Ukraine to use it as a nuclear blackmail. And finally, the kind of a summary in terms of what it means. As a kind of follow-up, what is going to happen. Now, I would disagree with Mr. Aristovich that this is a great breakthrough and a great victory for Mr. Zelensky. In fact, I would argue this is exactly the opposite. This is the beginning of the end of Mr. Zelensky and of the Ukrainian government in Kiev. Because if in June this year, Putin publicly went on record offering peace terms that were to conclude peace, all Ukraine had to do was agree to the loss of 4 provinces in Donbass and agree to no membership in NATO. And then Russia publicly committed itself to negotiate peace. This was in June, just a couple of months ago. Now, official Russian position that Putin verbalized is that there is going to be no negotiations at all with the current, as he put it, current regime in Kiev. The same thing was said by Russian representative at the United Nations, And also when you hear the public display of outrage in Russia, and all political commentators that I can hear essentially say now publicly what was not said just a short time ago, which is that no compromises, no more any accords, no more anything at all to do with Zelensky regime. Total victory, complete capitulation of the Kiev regime, total occupation of Ukraine, including Kiev, not just Novorossiya. This is now becoming an official Russian position. Now, whether the Russians are going to be able to accomplish this, we shall see. But at least the fallout from the Kursk offensive of the Ukrainian forces is escalation. The war has now been, the war front has been now extended. It is now extra 400 kilometers. And it is unlikely that that serves the purposes of Ukrainian success. The longer the front, the more soldiers they need, the more weapons they need, the more money they need, and it's questionable whether they're going to get it. But this is a big gamble for Mr. Zelensky, and time will show if he would succeed. The West certainly made another step at escalation. Thank you very much. I hope to see you soon. In war in Ukraine, issues of contemporary politics. There's also Russia under Yeltsin and Putin. There's also Russia under the communist regime. There's also Russian history and European history. Thank you very much. See you next time.